I'm in favor of making things more equal.
Okay, but I'm not. I'm making things more free. And freedom naturally will cause inequality.
Entails discrimination. Freedom allows white men to control everything.
Freedom allows white men to control everything. This is a paradigm repeated over and over by woke Marxists, reworded and repackaged in various forms or another, all to explain their belief that white people have created a hegemonic superstructure in society that puts white people on top by giving themselves access to a special type of racial or cultural capital called whiteness. And they maintain this dominance through the means of white supremacy. One of the tools of this white supremacist system of dominance is the concept of freedom itself, saying that freedom is something only for white people, with the Boston Review saying that American freedom has long been connected to the presumed right of whites to dominate everyone else. Or how about from the Toronto Star in referring to the Freedom Convoy protesters with the headline saying, "Freedom protests are white supremacy in all its glory." Or The Nation with an article titled, "The History of Freedom is a History of Whiteness," discussing a book titled White Freedom by author Tyler Stovall, with even the Washington Post referring to the author in one of their own articles about the freedom protests, saying the notion of freedom was historically and remains intertwined with whiteness. The belief that one is entitled to freedom is a key component of white supremacy. So, there you go. As far as the woke left is concerned, freedom is a key component of white supremacy. Woke Squad member Cori Bush just straight up says it, tweeting that the American freedom we celebrate, particularly when referring to the 4th of July, is only for white people. And so, since they are against white supremacy to the point of calling to overthrow it, they are by definition against the concept of freedom, to the point of actually replacing freedom in our own social phrases with a term like equity. As seen here with Cori Bush again, tweeting, "It's time for us to rebuild our nation with equity and justice for all." Well, we know what the actual phrase is. It's freedom and justice for all. But they remove it because they don't want freedom. As Thomas said in the opening video, he's in favor of making things more equal. Well, freedom doesn't do that. Freedom actually makes things unequal because it allows people to make their own decisions in life, be those good or bad ones. So it creates inequity, which is just another reason for the woke Marxists to be against freedom. I mean, you actually had some calling for Joe Biden to create a Secretary of Equity, for crying out loud. All to more enforce their desires for a socialist redistribution scheme to make things more equal, as Thomas would have it.
That we needed to profoundly change the distribution of resources. I like to say very bluntly, our mission is to redistribute wealth. A lot of people bristle at that phrase. That is, in fact, the phrase we need to use. We have been doing this work for 7 years to more equitably redistribute resources.
So, all of this just shows how far these people are from believing in any kind of concept for freedom, as it stands in polar opposite of their entire ideological worldview. This is probably most exemplified in their absolute disdain for freedom of speech, with a Times columnist denouncing free speech as a white man's obsession. Because what's more unequal than allowing people to voice different opinions, right? Especially those that don't conform to the established narrative. And even worse for them is being able to expose the lies of that narrative. That's the power of free speech. It's the reason the entire First Amendment basically deals with mostly protecting speech. Democrats and the woke left know this and have used that power to themselves to great effect. So it's no wonder that they continually try to silence anyone that speaks up against them when using the power of their own speech to effect change or just to call out their blatant lies. So Democrats and woke left try to censor people by creating arbitrary distinctions that divide speech into categories. One of the most well-known examples of this is, of course, the concept of hate speech. Democrats and the woke left are very fond of saying hate speech is not free speech. That they're all for free speech, but hate speech is not protected speech.
And to shut it down the second it appears. And short of that, we will protect the right to free speech, but there is a limit. There is a limit to what you can do, and hate speech is not protected.
And of course, what ends up being labeled as hate speech is usually just the things that the Democrats and the woke left dislike, or exposes the narratives they try to craft. Even though time and time again, when the law and courts become involved, the concept of hate speech is found to not exist, and that the First Amendment does in fact cover all those pesky words and phrases Democrats and the leftists label as hate speech. With one of the most recent cases of Mattel versus Tam finding its way all the way to the Supreme Court, with a 8-0 decision in favor of the First Amendment. With the court quoting a passage from another case, Texas v. Johnson, saying, "If there is a bedrock principle underlining the First Amendment, it is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive or disagreeable." I mean, that might as well say the expression of an idea simply because Democrats finds the idea offensive or disagreeable. And so the argument that hate speech isn't covered by the First Amendment is just blatantly false. Yet Democrats and the woke left will continually use the argument to silence people anyways, because they can still use cultural means, as they peddle the label and attach it to anything they don't like to pressure social media companies, corporations, and other cultural institutions to censor hate speech content. Because limiting the power of free speech to those that repeat their narratives is the only way the narrative can succeed. This is why they continue to create more and more labels to censor speech. Where hate speech fails to work, they've started using new terms, such as misinformation or disinformation, to target speech they don't like. These terms primarily coming about as a response to the pushback against the COVID narrative and around vaccines, believing that the government has to censor misinformation because, as Biden's own Surgeon General puts it, not doing so takes away our power and freedom.
Let's talk about the misinformation out there about vaccines. You announced a new advisory this week to combat misinformation, specifically on social media.
But what I've also said to them, publicly and privately, is that it's not enough, that we are still seeing a proliferation of misinformation online. And we know that health misinformation harms people's health. It costs them their lives. I've seen that as a doctor over the years as patients have struggled with health misinformation. And here's a key thing to remember. Health misinformation takes away our freedom and our power to make decisions for us and for our families. And that's a problem. And the platforms have to recognize that they've played a major role in the increase in speed and scale with which misinformation is spreading.
So, no matter what you may believe about COVID, vaccines, or whatever else, this is a government official calling for social media companies to censor Americans, completely going against the very principle the First Amendment was meant to protect: the sovereign right of the individual having the power to speak freely. I mean, the government was instituted to protect our rights. That's its purpose. Yet we have government officials pressuring or outright working with social media companies that control the technology we now use to talk to each other. And so while the First Amendment prevents the government from abridging our right of free speech, it only does so because at the time it was created, the founders would have obviously believed that only the government would have the power to censor your speech. Yet now, due to the technology we use, the ability to spread our speech is greater than the founders could have ever imagined. Only now the power to censor that speech is not in the hands of the government, but rather in the hands of these social media companies. But just because that power has changed hands doesn't make our inalienable right to speak freely disappear, nor does it mean the government's job to protect those rights comes to an end. Yet it appears Democrats in government positions don't see it that way. Because it's not just Biden's Surgeon General calling to censor so-called misinformation. It's Biden's press secretary all the way up to Biden himself.
Providing for Facebook or other platforms to measure and publicly share the impact of misinformation on their platform and the audience it's reaching. Also with the public, with all of you, to create robust enforcement strategies that bridge their properties and provide transparency about rules. You shouldn't be banned from one platform and not others for providing misinformation out there.
I make a special appeal to social media companies and media outlets. Please deal with the misinformation and disinformation that's on your shows. It has to stop.
And this trend to censor people speaking against the narratives or simply just stating the truth isn't just limited to Democrats in the federal government. We have seen across the country in the battle against critical race theory and queer theory in schools, parents being routinely censored when speaking in public hearings to school boards. School boards that have become increasingly hostile towards the parents, particularly in regards to CRT and gender identity crap, where when parents try to tell these school boards what their children are being taught or given access to, the parents have their microphones cut and chastised for using improper language.
I come as a parent, a very concerned parent, about the materials that are in our school, allowed for our children to have access to. These two books that are on the poster are Lawn Boy and Gender Queer. So Gender Queer, let's go here. Alison Bechdel writes in Fun Home about discovering masturbation soon after her first period. I discovered it around the same age, followed by the further realization that my ability to become aroused was governed by a strict law of diminishing returns, an elaborate fantasy based on Plato's Symposium. The more I had to interact with my genitals, the less likely I was to reach a point of satisfaction. The best fantasy was one that did not require any physical touch at all. I got a new strap-on harness today. I can't wait to put it on you. It will fit my favorite dildo perfectly. I can't wait to have your cock in my mouth. I'm going to give you the blowjob of your life. Then I want you inside me.
Sorry, you're out of order. This is your first warning.
This is a book that is accessible in Adams 12. So
Kindly refrain from further reading here, please. Thank you.
After seeing a September 9th school board meeting in Texas on pornography in the schools, I decided to check the titles at my child's school, Fairfax High School. The books were available, and we checked them out. Both of these books include pedophilia, sex between men and boys. Both books describe different acts. One book describes a 4th grade boy performing oral sex on an adult male, from the author Jonathan Evison. What if I told you I touched another guy's dick? What if I told you I sucked it? I was 10 years old, but it's true. I sucked Doug Goebel's dick, the real estate guy, and he sucked mine too. This is not an oversight at Fairfax High School. This material,
there are children in the audience here.
Do not interrupt my time. My time is restored and my time is finished. These books are in stock and available in the libraries of Robinson,
for high school
Langley,
students,
and Annandale High Schools. Pornography is offensive to all people. It is offensive to common decency. It is the reason why the MPAA provides...
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read you an assignment given to my 15-year-old daughter at a local high school. This will be horrifying for me to read to you, but that will give you perspective on how she must have felt when her teacher required her to memorize this and to act it out in front of her entire class. I don't love you. It's not you. It's just, I don't like your dick, or any dick in that case. I cheated, Joe.
I'm sorry.
This is
Forgive me. Excuse me. I don't. Thank you so much for your. Thank you for your comment. Forgive me. We're not using profanity. Are you?
Okay.
What?
That's relevant.
Okay.
Yes. The teacher
this
required my daughter to memorize this and read this pornographic material.
Excuse me. Please don't engage with the audience.
Okay. Sorry,
So
it's my
please
first time
continue your
here.
public comment. Your time is. You've got 1 minute and 19 seconds. I ask you simply. This is a public meeting. I ask for decorum, and I'm asking. Dr. Jara. Thank you so much, Dr. Jara.
If you don't want me to read it to you, what was that like for my 15-year-old daughter to have to memorize pornographic material and memorize it and portray?
Madam President, members of the board, staffs on this. We can have the region superintendent speak.
And she came to your school when she procures bids for ISU with construction and came to your school and spoke to your staff for 2 straight days. Why did she do that? This is why she did that. This is why she did that. To make sure that when our students want to know whether or not they have a vagina or a penis, they have pictures from your staff to be able to help them. They don't have enough sex. They don't have enough anal sex. They need adults to tell them how to masturbate. And what I call that is... So here's what I'm asking you. You have a hard time hearing this from me, but this is for 10 years old and up, and this bill was passed for 5-year-olds. And you have a hard time me sitting here telling you the words anal sex, masturbation. That's hard for you, or the time's up? Because the time's not really up. I don't believe you, Mr. Wiley, that my time is up. But I'm going to end with this. I'll close with this, because this was too much for you. I can tell right now. And that's why you're cutting me off.
All of these parents are simply reading out what their kids are being exposed to in schools, and these school boards are censoring them while telling them that the material is inappropriate for the public hearing. Well, if it's inappropriate for the public hearing, it should damn well be inappropriate for the school. Yet this is happening because they do not want people exposing what's happening in the schools. And should the parents then try to call out the school boards themselves on what they're doing, they get censored and bullied by armed guards that are in some cases actually working for the school board itself.
My question is, does this apply to school board members? Because at the last meeting, Shirley Brown was caught on the microphone talking about big balls.
About school board
Her
members. You're done.
words.
You're done, Mrs. Bikondi. You're done. Thank you. You're done. You cannot go and expound on school board members. I've told you. I've warned you several times. Thank you. Thank you very much. You're done. Move on.
Oh, okay.
Goodbye. You were about to say something horrible about Shirley Brown. Please leave. You've said things about me that were untrue. Leave, please. Do you have children in our school district? Do you have children in our
Point of order, that is not appropriate.
It is.
No way is that appropriate. You don't get to ask people who come to a public meeting whether they have children or not, period. Way out of line.
Thank you very much.
Jeez, oh, Pete.
Thank you very much. Please leave. You should please leave. Ask her to leave.
They don't want normal Americans to have the power to challenge them. And the easiest way to do that is to restrict your ability to speak publicly. This isn't just a strategy. This is a mindset that has been instilled into the leftist worldview, that the right, conservative, Republican side, whatever label you want to use, must be censored and not allowed to express their views. This mindset can be traced back to Herbert Marcuse and his essay of repressive tolerance, where he openly calls that the right must be censored. As he explains, liberating tolerance then would mean intolerance against movements from the right and tolerance of movements from the left. As to the scope of this tolerance and intolerance, it would extend to the stage of action as well as of discussion and propaganda, of deed as well as of word. And he goes on to explain that his reasons for this is because he believes that the world is in extreme danger. an emergency situation that has become the normal state of affairs, to where the wrong deed or speech from a right-wing figure could lead to fascism or more Nazis. As he puts it, the whole post-fascist period is one of clear and present danger. Consequently, true pacification requires the withdrawal of tolerance before deed at the stage of communication in word, print, and picture. Such extreme suspension of the right of free speech and free assembly is indeed justified only if the whole society is in extreme danger. And as he says, he believes that it is. So this mindset permeates all throughout the left. As you can see here, with this person saying that terrorists, insurrectionists, and Nazis don't deserve to have freedom of speech because hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment. These are all labels that leftists place on the right wing because they do not want the right wing having the power to express itself. I mean, is it any wonder that Biden and his administration tried to create what is essentially a ministry of truth under the DHS called the Disinformation Governance Board of all things? That would have no doubt targeted Republicans and conservatives as they're the ones Democrats routinely label as spreading disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech. Thankfully, it appears it was scrapped. But the idea that such a thing would exist within the government of the United States, when we clearly have a right to freedom of speech that is protected by the First Amendment, is terrifying. Yet Democrats did it anyways. Because Democrats are afraid of the power that freedom of speech and freedom in general gives to people. You can't control people if they are free to speak their minds, free to make their own choices and so on. But of course that doesn't stop them from trying to control you. I mean, that's basically what the entire propaganda legacy media is for, with Mika Brzezinski letting slip her opinion that it's the media job to control people.
That the dangerous, edges here are that he's trying to undermine the media, trying to make up his own facts, and it could be that while unemployment and the economy worsens, he could have undermined the messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think, and that is our job.
Yeah, if you look at,
and if they want to control people, that's really just a means to have power over people, which is what they really want. Power. They want to take power away from people and to give it to themselves. So they have to stifle freedom, because freedom is power. Going back to our boy Thomas at the start of the video, when he says that freedom allows white men to control everything, he says that because he believes in the CRT ideological worldview that only white people are free and everyone else is oppressed due to white supremacy. And so only white people are allowed freedom. That's why all these leftists label freedom as being a part of whiteness. And so to overturn that, they have to take that power away and give it to themselves.
That means that you control a massive system. It means that you own oil supplies. It means that you control textiles. It means that you have a massive labor force under your control. And to be ethical, if you're a billionaire today, the thing that you need to do is give up control and power. So I don't want your money as much as we want your power.
So rest assured, freedom is what these people are afraid of, because they know the power it has. They will do everything within their means to control it and to take it away from people in order to transfer that power to themselves, while telling people certain situations aren't about freedom or personal choice.
This is not about freedom or personal choice.
And should you dare claim that freedom is something meaningful and should be considered in every situation, that you should have the freedom to choose for yourself, speak for yourself, and defend yourself, Democrats on the left will tell you,
no, screw your freedom.
Because if they don't, they lose to the power of freedom. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. You can find me on most social media sites talking about culture and politics. So do look me up and say hello. And take care and God bless.